edges. I've seen him wearing that before. It's like, I don't think I've ever seen it. Right. Day of the Dead-ish, right? Yep. She can tie me up here. It's time to start. Here. Tommy's usually our note taker, so just to get him to sit down. we delegate.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started in a minute.
Yep.
Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you are.
The transcript thinks you are me.
Oh, good. I'm Brian Haberman, not Dwayne Wessels. Welcome to DELEG. If you're not here for DELEG, stay anyways, because this is the most interesting working group in the IETF. So we have a small but busy little agenda to go through.
No, I didn't give it to you.
Dad, can I please have control? Before we get started, this is the new note well. If any of you running around here have a blue dot, you've heard the discussions around this. This is really just a reminder of the things that you've agreed to when you signed up to the IETF, when you're participating in a working group. Despite the advice I think we were given the other day, I'm not going to ask you to read all of this. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that you've already agreed to this. So make sure you understand what you signed up for. So since we've been moving into this hybrid environment, we have made some tips available for everyone. So, you know, if you're in here, you should have Meet Echo up so that we know that you're here. That way we know what size room we get the next time around. If for some reason they like putting DELEG in really big rooms, but you know, we'll make it work. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to anybody, either in the chairs or from the secretariat or the Meet Echo folks, and they will help you along. So slight update to the agenda that we published to the mailing list. We're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about points on the base protocol that we want to make sure that we cover and start reaching consensus on. And then Dwayne and I are going to spend a little bit of time asking about people who have actually been doing some implementations of the protocol, if they're willing to talk about that, and whether or not we actually want to put an implementation status section in the draft itself. And then you also probably saw a posting of an update to the requirements document. We've gotten a little bit of feedback saying, hey, why don't you just go ahead and publish this? So I'd like to get some feedback from the working group if they see it's valuable to actually publish the requirements document as an informational RFC, and we can discuss that later. Does anybody have anything they would like to add to the agenda? The requirements, so Tim posted an update to the requirements document because it was about to expire. And then we got a couple of messages saying, hey, how come it was off list. I'm sorry, it was, yes, yeah. But anyways, so with that, unless there was any updates to the agenda going once, going twice, Peter, are you talking? Okay, so Peter's going to come walk us through the document. format for this. He's got it broken up into chunks. So we're going to do, Peter talks for a little bit, and then, we'll have some discussion time on each of those topics so that we can reach some conclusions. Peter?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to late in the week and early in the morning. Okay. How does this work? Not yet? Okay, thank you. So we're going to talk about the version 05 plus couple little changes we did after the 05 was published. First, little summary what we've did between Madrid and now. And then we will go through open issues, either like to-dos in the text or GitHub issues, or possibly things we forgot to lock in both of those places. So essentially, the upshot is that the semantics didn't change. We have our own RR type instead of SVCB, but it does exactly the same thing with just different names, but that's about it. We have dedicated registry for keys, so we are not tied to SVCB. We can do whatever we feel the need to. We have, I would say, stub of security considerations section, so that will need more work, but that's new compared to Madrid. And also we have a res info key from Florian. So now the resolvers are able to know, well, stub resolvers are able to get the information upfront whether the actual resolver, recursive resolver, does support DELEG or not, which might be useful for security sensitive stubs. Here's the comparison of the R types. You can see on the top, there's the version 01, on the bottom, version 05. You can see that the information it conveys is the same. The differences in the names, plus the version 04 allows you to use multiple names instead of just one, which right now doesn't make any practical difference at all. In future, when we have additional keys like transport equals DO2, DOT, DOQ, whatever, it will allow nice deduplication, so you don't have to repeat the extra keys like 20 times if you have 20 different name servers. That's the only reason we have that. I've mentioned the res info. Security consideration section does exist in the version 05, but it's really stub. Please have a look. And we have examples which include in there, so you can go there, look whether it makes sense when you read it. Hopefully it will explain better what the include exactly does, because it might not be obvious from the first glance if you don't see it in front of you. Between version 01 and 05, almost all of the text was rewritten and reordered and everything. But the idea is not to change the protocol. Again, the semantics didn't change, but we are trying to make it easier to understand, because the version 01 was still in the mindset, this is SVCB, but not really. We have to take SVCB spec and change this and that and that and that and that. And people said that this is very confusing. So we've reworded everything to define our own type from scratch and just say, okay, the special handling for zone file is the same as in SVCB, instead of saying it's SVCB with these little tweaks. There was, I will be polite and say, lots of fixes in examples, mainly in the DNSSEC bit, because the NSEC records were wrong in examples, RR6 were sometimes also wrong, and so on. So it was like, copy-paste errors and stuff like that. So we've hopefully fixed all of them, but please have a look, because it's really hard to write by hand. After 05 was published, we did minor tweaks, mainly like getting rid of some of the to-dos. I will mention those. And Paul Hoffman contributed protocol overview section. So now you have like 3 paragraphs which summarize everything. So we have like high-level idea what this is even about. And then we go on with all the gory details as the previous version did, or the version 05 did. Implementation experience. I jumped the gun bit, sorry. Akamai was the first to beat all the open source implementations. So they have authoritative implementation and resolver, which is spec complete version 05, and it actually works. this was posted to the mailing list. So you can actually query live servers on the internet and see what the implementation does. For bind, we have very minimal first scratching the surface implementation, which has the RR type, which means that you can compile a DIG, which actually understands what it is. It's not unknown type, but it will show you the syntax which you would use in the zone file, so you can see with your eyes what it is without hex editor. Bind can load the zone, but not really serve these special delegations. But the test bed Ralph prepared has a zone which starts at Akamai authoritative server and then does include, which points to a zone hosted on bind, and then from bind it goes elsewhere, and this actually works. So that's like nice first step. Core DNS library has the RR format implemented, and the feedback is, yeah, okay, now I can do that with version 0.5. DNS Python also has the format implemented, so you can play with your own scripts and see what it does. And the primary feedback is that the multi-level include really smells bad, basically. Because yes, it's ugly like hell, everyone agrees. And it seems that even though it's very ugly, we probably need at least 2 levels because TLDs nowadays don't allow you to change TTL at all, typically. So if you have multi-provider setup where you have one provider and another provider, and say one of them starts doing weird things, and you want to quickly remove one of the 2 providers out of the equation, so remove their include, you cannot do that in a reasonable time, because waiting 1 day to remove faulty provider is kind of unnecessarily bad. So having 1 layer of indirection with extra include might work around that inflexibility. I didn't put it to slides, and I'm ashamed to say that aloud, but it can also serve you to play stupid DNS tricks on the delegation level. So you have 1 layer of indirection which points to something which dynamically generates the result of the include, and then you can load balance providers or do whatever stupid tricks you want. So on the mailing list, there is names of servers and zones where you can play. This slide is already outdated because Ralph is busy bee and he's adding the zones with other configurations to play with. So have a look at the list. And over this week, we've met 4 different registries, and they had 3 different ideas how to implement it in EPP or RPP. So that gives you the idea how difficult this is going to be. Nice thing is nobody really ran away screaming, no, 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 over my dead body. It was quite the opposite. It was like, okay, we will need to do this. How do we do this? So it was very constructive, and we didn't get really like pushback. Okay, let's, this is our sandbox, go away. So that was a pleasant surprise. The discussion is going on in RPP working group already. So if you want to touch EPP, RPP, I suggest you go there and voice your opinions on that. Yes, that's the summary what we've done since Madrid. If you have any comments, perhaps we can, yeah. Okay, that was easy. And now the to-dos. The Montreal Museum of Fine Arts has wonderful artifacts. This is one of these. And we have lots of to-dos. Some of them are really simple. You open the box and it's like, yeah, sure, we do this in 5 minutes. And some of them might just explode your head, so brace. I think that the most frequent question is, okay, so can we have example of this or that or that or that or that? And as authors, we say, yes, sure, you can have as many examples you want. But then the question is it like going too far, or is it, usually the traditional IETF way is that you have 40 pages of text and you make up your own interpretation in your head, and it's up to you. So if we really like decide to go overboard, we can do something really radical and don't call it examples, but call it actual test vectors, because now we have implementations. We will be having more in future, soon, I hope. And we need to query the implementations anyway and compare the behavior to make sure that we actually agreed on what the text means and what it's supposed to do, and so on. And at the point where we have implementations which do agree on what to respond with, then we can have a script which like goes through the 40 interesting combinations and spits out all the combinations into appendix ZZZ. And then we can have actual test vectors. So you have, here's the spec which explains why you do this. And then here's the test vectors to make sure that you actually understood the text the right way. Of course, there is a risk that we will get it wrong in all of the implementations, and then we will have wrong test vectors. But that also happens not only in IETF, but also OpenSSL and other projects. So that wouldn't be the first time. So I'm guilty of some of that myself.
So Peter, before you leave this topic, I think one of the questions I have is, are they asking for examples because the text isn't clear enough in how to do something, or do they just want to see what it looks like?
I think mostly it's, I want to see it because I think I understand, but I want to check. The feedback we've got is not like, what the hell this is? It's more like, show me so I can be 100% sure. If I...
Okay, then I would encourage people who are asking about examples to make sure that they're clear that they're asking for, if they're asking for examples because they don't understand the text. Because if that's the case,
yeah, of course, that would be very important. Of course, yeah. I mean, if anything is unclear, speak up. We are here to get that sorted out, right? So I think this is the elephant in the room, whether we want to diverge from the traditional IETF way, because if we do it the traditional way, we have job security guaranteed, because we will be arguing about every sentence in next 20 years, or we can go this way and have the test vectors, and then there is not that much to argue, hopefully. We'll see. I will go through a bunch of the to-dos which are written in the draft, in the text, and you will see that it has a common thing. Okay, Florian.
Yes, I wanted to comment on the test vectors because this also came up in chat. So if the test vectors are wrong, I would say, and all the implementations agree, then by definition they are right and you have an errata in your RFC. Like then basically your RFC is wrong, not the test vectors.
Yeah, sure. I mean, who is right, implementation or spec, right? If all those implementations do the same thing, then perhaps the spec is wrong, sure.
This is Paul Hoffman, wearing a very old hat of mine for IPsec. We actually dealt with this a lot, and actually even before that with SMIME. As long as there is active discussion of, are the test vectors wrong? Did people misinterpret as they're finding and such like that? It actually doesn't matter. You can say, eventually the test vectors are wrong, we need to revise them. Most often it will simply be that one or two people misinterpreted the text and didn't notice that the test vector disagreed with their own implementation. So I wouldn't rat hole on this too early. There is lots of experience in the IETF with test vectors, and it generally works out really well if you have test vectors. If the test vectors are done by a person outside, then it becomes a lot more dicey. But if there's an agreed one that's either in this document or in a second document, it really helps. And when there is disagreement later, it's very easy to hone in on what it is.
Okay, thank you. I'll go through a couple of examples in the text. You will see that they have a common theme. So this is on these slides, you will see like copy paste of the text from the draft. So this is the example. If you set full text search for what you see on the slide, you will see the full context of it. So one of the to-dos is, well, perhaps we should have an example which compares what the legacy resolver does and the modern DELEG resolver does, depending on what records it gets. That's one of the requests in the text. Second is basically, again, give me an example or add an example in what order exactly the resolver will, I will rephrase it. What's the priority order in which the records take effect, essentially? Third is, looks like an example, but it's kind of borderline respecifying DNS basics, because there can be a situation where the client is old and doesn't know that the DELEG exists. In that case, the client will send the DE=0 bit in the request. So the server knows that the client is old. It cannot deal with the DELEG. In that situation, the author server will kind of switch to the old behavior. And even though there might be a DELEG record, it will pretend that it will not create a zone cut because the old client wouldn't understand anyway. And that practically means that the authoritative server treats the DELEG type as an unknown type. It will just feed it to the client the old way. And all this is lots of words to say, well, just follow 1034, and that's it. So, I mean, in theory, it can be like one line in the spec, just do the old way. But then people come and say, okay, but what exactly is the old way? And we don't want to have respecify 1034 because that's like total minefield. I don't want to go there. And I think that we are in big agreement with other authors that we are not respecifying DNS and DNSSEC. We just want to tweak it a little bit. So perhaps the test vectors might be a way out of this conundrum. So we say, do it the old way and look at the test vectors if what the old way would be. So that's one of the possibilities. And the third is kind of the same story in different colors. What if there is 2 zones on the same authoritative server, one of the parent and the child, and you do the query for name which in the child, and then what happens? Again, this is already specified in 1034. We are not changing it. We don't want to respecify it. So again, what do? We can say one sentence, do it the old way, or we can say, do it the old way, and here are test vectors to make sure that you understood the interaction between you and old. Yeah, okay, so this is end of the block with examples and test vectors. I guess it would be a good moment if anyone wants to air opinions on that. What to do, test vectors, yes, no. As for others, I think that for me, between me and I think Ralph, we are on board with having test vectors because we have to do all the work anyway. It's just a matter of like testing, comparing the implementations and exercising all the corner cases. So the question is basically, do we put it into the text or not? Because all the stuff which needs to be done has, all the DNS answers will have to be tested anyway. So do we put product of that testing into the draft or not?
Yeah, I want to add especially these special cases for the old clients. I mean, this was a discussion with a lot of implementers, and we really had to dig deep to actually understand what is happening. So that's why I think having something that shows this rather than every time having to go to all the full DNSX specification and finding it out is a better way.
Yeah. The thing is that we don't want to specify it, but it forces us to read 1034 and the DNSSEC RFCs as well to actually make sure that we understand it. So we read it like 10 times to make sure, yeah, okay, it will actually work if you just follow all the rules, it's perfectly fine. But saying that and convincing yourself about that fact are two different things. I'm not hearing any disagreement. So I guess we might be an indication that test vectors might fly in this working group. Yeah, maybe tentatively. We'll see what comes out. Okay. So then forward to the next section. Continuing with the theme of respecifying stuff, which is already defined elsewhere. One of the feedback from the implementations into the libraries, the core DNS and DNS Python and bind as well, is like, is this, or how much of SVCB applies to DELEG? Basically, we are trying to say all of it applies. We just have different set of keys, but other than that, it's SVCB. And one of the like very quirky things in SVCB is escaping. So if you have server name which contains weird characters like binary 0, or I'm not saying you should, but you can do that. You have binary 0 or comma or you name it. Then the SVCB has its own rules for escaping stuff, and zone file has its own rules for escaping stuff, and DNS names have their own rules for escaping stuff. So that means that you have potentially insane 3 levels of escaping. And again, there was a request, okay, so we know that this is like SVCB, but give me an example. We might do that. The example probably will explode some heads when you see it, but it's again, just follow the rules which already are in existence. We are not really finding anything, just follow the rules, period. Paul.
Just as you were speaking, I realized there are no test vectors in SVCB. So I believe that us doing this, not only as an example, but in the test vectors will, because we're telling everyone, oh, just use your code from SCVP. We might help fix some of the SVCB code.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. And the SVCB spec has some little tests, but usually it's more like this is not allowed to be combined together. But I think that they have negative test vectors. This is not allowed, but they don't have like positive, okay, this is how you do the crazy escaping thing, if I remember correctly. Again, the common theme, examples with a multi-name values for the keys. Oh, Christian, I don't know where he is, but okay, go ahead. I suppose it's about SVCB still?
Yeah, about the escaping thing. So, Christian Zimdenek, I want to remind you that not only DNS is involved, it's also registry protocols. So escaping has to be in mind that it should work also on the registry protocols.
Do you have something specific in mind? Because we are concerned with zone file. We have wire format, which doesn't need escaping, obviously. And then we have zone file presentation format, and that's what we specified. And I don't know how that exactly translates to your end of the problem. So can you detail what is going on?
To a bit elaborate on it. Okay. So in contrast to SVCB, DELEG is meant for delegation. So it has to be in the registries, or at least to have to be present in the databases. So databases might be considered, so XML might be considered as a transaction format for EPP, and JSON for RPP. So escaping should be working on all these.
I hear what you are saying, but I'm not sure what's the implication for the draft. Because I would think that if you want, for example, encode the zone file presentation format into JSON, you add JSON escaping on top of everything else. So if there is, I don't know, backlash probably does something in JSON, I guess. So if you have backlash in the data, you will have to backlash it a bit further.
In my defense, I don't have the escaping format from SVCB in mind, so it's just for consideration, and that we might have to look into this.
Okay, yeah, well, okay, we will think about it. We will perhaps talk offline and sit in front of an example of XML or whatever.
Yeah, I think
to see what would happen.
Very beneficial, I think.
Okay,
right.
Point taken. 226. Yeah, so that's a request for more examples, just because we can. The question is at what point the examples are too convoluted, because right now the include examples in the draft in the version 05 are kind of not what you would want to do in practice, but they are like to demonstrate what you can technically do, but you shouldn't because it's too convoluted for like any reasonable operator. I don't know. The question basically is, should we have examples over the top to demonstrate if you do this, it will load, but you really shouldn't go that far? Or I don't know, any opinions on that? Or is it like dangerous because we are telling people, you can do this. Try it out. Okay, no one. You can, of course, If you email to the mailing list, it's even better if you then telling us now, because we will not forget. Yeah, that's one of the to-dos we sorted out. I will skip it. Security considerations. That's completely different kettle of fish. Please, please, please have a look, because I think that it's fair to say that authors are too long with the draft, so we might be, we might have tunnel vision, we might be missing something. And my experience is that especially the university researchers are very inventive when it comes to misusing protocol features for weird stuff. So please think about it, try to break it. It's helpful if you say on the mailing list, I already thought about it and I didn't find a way to break it, which is like positive information as opposed to silence. If there is a silence, we don't know whether anyone actually thought about it. If you say, I've tried and I couldn't break it, that's very good to know. Continuing with security considerations, there's a section called Preventing Downgrade Attacks, which is kind of similar with the spec couple sections above. And the feedback on this particular place is remove it or like condense it because it's repetitive. But now the question is, well, perhaps that's the purpose of the security considerations, to repeat the important bits. Like if you skim the 20 pages of the document, perhaps you really need to see this one paragraph because you might missed it, but this is the important one. Personally, I would say it's better to keep it and repeat it, perhaps with just simple like link back to C section, whatever, to make sure that people actually don't miss it. So these were the simple to-dos from the text. We are done with it. So, anyone, any feedback on security considerations or anything else we spoke about up until now? No? Okay, so now the more interesting stuff. I hope that this will spark some discussion. This morning at like 6 a.m., I've realized that we don't specify what happens if there is unknown key, because right now the draft fully specifies all the keys. No other keys are defined, so it's kind of easy to miss that there can be any kind of garbage. The key number equals whatever. And it is acceptable, syntactically acceptable, semantically it should do nothing because the resolver doesn't know what it is. SVCB spec says if you interpret SVCB RR and you get a key which you don't know what it is, you just ignore the key as if it wasn't there. That's what the SVCB does. We don't have that instruction, so I guess we should just mimic the SVCB behavior and say unknown keys must be ignored, which would be one sentence, and I can see people queuing up, so please, Victor.
SVCB has a key called mandatory that specifies which of
That's
the
next
keys.
slide. Yes, I will get to it. Or perhaps, you know what? Perhaps I will go through 2 more slides, if you don't mind, Eric, and then we can discuss it in one go because these are related. Perhaps that will be better. So, unknown keys, SVCB says ignore them. I guess we should mimic that behavior. What Victor just mentioned is that SVCB has a mechanism which allows for a producer of the SVCB record to say, this key is really important. If you don't understand it, you cannot skip it, but you have to ignore the whole RR. And the use case in our little DNS pond would be, for example, if you have 2 DNS servers, one is DO53 only, and the second one is DNS over Quick, for example, but it doesn't listen on port 53. It's just either Quick or 53, 2 different machines, 2 different IP addresses. If we say ignore unknown keys, and we have an old resolver which does understand DELEG but doesn't understand the secure transport, because we first will have the DELEG spec but not the secure transport spec at the same time probably. We can imagine a scenario that the old resolver gets the 2 RRs, one of them says transport equals DOQ. It doesn't understand the key transport, it will ignore it, and then it has 2 RRs, and it will try to connect to port 53 on the server which doesn't speak port 53, for example. That's one of the examples I made up this morning. So I guess we should copy from SVCB the behavior with the mandatory key, where you specify mandatory equals transport, for example, and then the consumer sees this and say, okay, I don't understand what this key is about, but it is really important, so I have to skip this RR and don't do anything with it. Seems it should work. And the third is different but related issue, that on include, you can also have key equals value pairs. It doesn't have any defined meaning because we don't have any use for it right now. It is defined what happens if you have like IP address and include at the same time. You ignore it because it's nonsense. But in future, we will have other keys. And what happens if you put that on include? And there is several possible ways how to go about it. Either we sit down and invent global rules for since now forever. This is how it will be. That is risking that with 64K space for a key, someone will invent a key with a semantics which doesn't fit the global rules we invent today. Other option is just say future spec, blah, blah, define. Basically, it's unknown key, so you just ignore it. And for every new key, we would have to say what happens when it is combined with include. That is most flexible going forward, but obviously hardest for anyone reading the IANA registry, because then they have to read up on what actually happens. I don't know. So I think these three are related. So I will invite Eric and Victor and Peter again, because it's on the common theme. Peter. And everyone else, of course, not just these three guys. Please speak up. Peter.
Hi, Peter Thomason. So about the mandatory key, do you want to make that mandatory to use, I mean? So let's say, for example, the transport key. Would it be required to write mandatory equals transport, and then only then it's fine to use the transport key?
Sorry, can you rephrase? I didn't catch that.
If we think that the transport signaling is really important, so for example, if DOQ is signaled and then we don't really want any resolver to contact the authoritative through plaintext UDP, then I guess that would mean that whenever you use transport, you also have to use mandatory equals transport, so that it can't happen that a resolver uses the record without applying the transport. So my question is,
yes,
when we use this mandatory keyword, do you want to make it required to use the mandatory keyword? Or is it optional to use it?
You mean mandatory together with the transport?
For example, yes.
I think what he means is that should some keys, when used, be always mandatory in that situation? It seems to make sense, or at least it should.
Yeah,
Right.
but that only works when you actually write it out, because resolvers that don't know that it's mandatory do have to rely on this keyword being present.
Yes, the whole
keyword.
point is that
that makes it quite verbose if it's always required.
Yeah, I think that if it depends on how you use the future keys and values, because they are not defined, right? So it's kind of hard to argue about undefined future keys. But if I go back to the example, we have two servers which both support DNS port 53 and DOQ. And we have an old resolver which doesn't understand the transport keyword at all. It's still fine to use transport equals DO53, DOQ, and don't put mandatory there, because the old resolver will just ignore it, and it has the ability to connect to port 53. So I would say it depends on what you are trying to do and what's the situation. So I don't think that making mandatory key mandatory is mandatory. Eric?
I think these go hand in hand. Like the reason why Service B ended up with both mandatory and with the ignore is for allowing future extensibility, because if you don't do both of those, then you ossify immediately on what set of things you support, because there are going to be some parameters, like let's say a future transport 2 parameter that that if you want to include that record, you need to be able to say ignore this record if you don't understand this. You can have a mix of records that have a mix of records that might be new using something that not everyone understands, and a mix of records that are for backwards compatibility to make sure you don't end up with situations where no one understands any of them. I think this is also why SVCB has the priority functionality in it, was so that if you start mixing some of these, you can start saying, well, actually pay attention to these newer formats, these newer records, if you understand them before you get to the other ones. So I think there is that risk that with not having priority here, some of that forward-looking things where you want to mix kind of newer protocols and older protocols and give guidance of use these ones first is no longer an option.
Okay, understood. Okay, so you are saying that we should keep, I will go back to slide. So we should do this, that unknown keys must be ignored. That's what you are saying, right?
Yes.
And we should also do this and
Yes.
inherit them under key. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I understand what
Yeah,
you're
those
saying.
those two together.
Yeah. Those two together. Okay, thank you. Paul
Hoffman. There's a long history in protocols in the IETF using mandatory and not, and it often screws up badly. That is that the receiver of a mandatory may or may not know which one and such like that. It's a knob that I don't think is necessary. I absolutely agree that we should say, if you don't know it, ignore it. And the number of cases where and again, because mandatory is from the speaker saying, you need to understand this, and if not, and that isn't necessary, I believe, in most cases. I think it's an unnecessary complication. As long as you have something that says, ignore this. And again, a receiver can go, this is a weird looking record, and ignore it all. Like, that is up to the resolver in this case. Resolvers are very used to having code that says, this looks messed up, I'm just going to drop it on the floor.
While Akamai, so while resolvers have these possibilities, I think if we have in the draft saying, if we don't understand a record, ignore it, and then have mandatory, we can express all needed combinations. And I think that's better than not having it.
It sounds like it to me, yeah. Victor?
Yeah, I disagree with Paul. We need to have both mandatory and ignore by default. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just also disagreeing with Paul. I think it's worth thinking through the scenarios, because the way that these work, when we were looking at this for SVCB, there are a number of important things we're going to want to be able to express that there's no way to operationally deploy if you can't express with that combination. If we knew all the possible things that we might want to deploy and we could specify all of them out now, then I think we could get by without it. But I think it's a bunch of things that we have on our list in the future are going to need a way to express this.
Yeah, I guess that with 64K wide key space, we cannot really say upfront what is going to happen when my child do something with DNS in future. I don't know. Okay, so I think that authors, do you feel that we need more feedback on this topic, or do we know what to do? It sounds to me that we just edit and be done with it. Okay. Yes, copy SVCB behavior, yeah. So that leaves us with this, which is related to unknown keys, but it's a little bit different, because what happens when include is combined with unknown key? For the same reasons that we don't know what future generations will do with that key space, I'm personally leaning towards leave this up for the future protocol developers to decide what to do on key by key basis, whether the keys are inherited or forced to all other, or what happens when it's inherited and the key is down. Do you combine them, or do you force the value, or I don't know. There are so many options. So I think that it will be dependent on what the key does. So any opinions? I can see Eric in a queue, but perhaps that's old hand.
Paul Hoffman, yes, I fully agree that as the keys beyond the ones in the base draft are defined, they must say, what does it mean on an include delegate thing. So for example, one of the ones we're assuming we're going to do is transport. Transport makes sense. You might say, go get, do that over here. One of the other ones we've been talking about is zone cut. Zone cut makes no sense in include delegate. So when someone defines the zone cut key, they need to say this, this does not apply. So I think that can even be stated in the document for in the area of include delegate, saying future extensions must say
Yeah,
this,
okay. Can be instruction for IANA, like template for key registration or whatever. Just make sure that you think about this. Okay, thank you. That's useful. What else we have? Yeah, this is a little feedback from the implementers that we have kind of new var format, because we say that server name and include delegate are sequence of DNS names. So if anyone likes drawing ASCII art, please send in ASCII art of like sequence of boxes of unknown length, and we will put it there. Yeah, that was definition used only in one place. We got rid of that. And this one, what is it? I forgot. Oh yeah, in one place we say that if you have DELEG server name equals, oh, okay, one step back. The owner name of the delegation is example. And now you have example, DELEG, server name equals ns1.example. That means that you are delegating to a name server which is in domain, but it doesn't have IP address. You've put there just a name. Then obviously that's not going to fly. That doesn't work today, because that's NS for in-domain delegation without glue equivalent. That's equivalent of what happens today. And today we just ignore it, because there is no way how to go there. The resolver doesn't have IP address. Resolver will figure it out by itself and just ignore that particular RR. Right now, our spec says that you must not do this. But what does it mean in practical terms? Does it mean that the zone file will not load? Or does it mean that the message will not parse at all and you get form error, and thus all of the delegation will just blow up because you made a mistake, or what? So I suggest that we add, like, you must not do this. And if you, we should add sentence like, if this condition is violated, then that single RR is ignored, which is equivalent of what happens in the current NS delegation, which is just wrong. But I think that the phrasing "you must not" without saying what happens if the must not is violated is like opening possibilities that different resolvers will do different things, like either ignoring the delegation completely versus ignoring one RR, or versus end of the universe or whatever. Victor.
I say should not, and specify ignore. There's no reason
should not
to leave any room for absurd failure modes. This isn't that tragic.
Yeah, right. Should not make sense, because no matter what we put in the text, it can happen on the wire. Either attacker or inventive operator will do that, no matter what we say. So should not make more sense, yes. And now we have two giant blobs at the end, which are possibly not for us to solve at this time. One is priming. I think we have plenty of time before this will get relevant for root zone, so perhaps let's not go there yet, and we can postpone that to separate documents. We have DELEG I record type, which can be put anywhere we feel like. So I feel that technically there is no obstacle to solving the priming problem. It just feels that it would be like scope creep, and let's not go there, I think. Anyone has any opinion on need of having priming in the base protocol document?
flown up, so as someone who cares a bit about the root because I have to run the damn thing. I had pointed out that, well, this, like way back, that DELEG does not support priming for the root. If I remember correctly, the current draft has wording in, it is explicit in the draft that it does not work. So I'm fine with that. I think that's good enough. What I had pointed out years ago or a year ago, this was kind of implicit. Now it's explicit, and I think that's good enough.
Okay. No one else? Fine with me, less work for me. And the cherry on top of the cake, there was a discussion that now we are going through lots of trouble because we are defining new special behavior for a specific type, and that's a single number. The idea is that, yeah, if, you know, my grandchildren want to have DELEG 2, they will have to go through the same kind of trouble because, again, they would have to redefine the special behavior for different type number. Idea is that perhaps we can just preemptively reserve a range, use only one number out of the range, but have a range. And then the signing rules, validation rules, how you include it into zone, how you include it in response, blah, 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 blah. All these will be the same for the range. The trouble is that IETF politics prevent us from that in this current draft or this working group even. So this will be discussed in DNSOP in the session right after we are done. So please go there and comment there because it doesn't belong here, I'm told. And that's all I have.
Looks like no more questions.
And any other comments or questions on the base protocol spec while we're here? All right, so we added two other additional topics for today. Peter actually covered some of it from a list of the known implementations. The question I have for the group is twofold. A, are there other implementations that aren't listed yet? And if people are willing to talk about those. And B, whether or not we should go ahead and put that list in the draft so that people are aware of where potential implementations exist so that they can do some experimentations. Does anybody have an implementation they want to talk about? Or if you just want to let the chairs know that you have an implementation, that's fine too. The bigger question is are people happy with putting that information in the draft in that implementation status? Schumann.
So Peter poked me a couple of times, so he forced me to come up to the mic. So I do have an implementation. It's essentially a prototype server, so it's not a real server, so I didn't bother contributing it to Peter's list, but it works, and over the hackathon I brought it mostly in line with 05. There's a few other things that I need to do, but there is an implementation out there. And it was also used in early feasibility testing by Roy Aarons and myself to see if we could, grease the response by injecting an unknown record in a referral response and see if clients explode, which they mostly didn't, although we got around that problem by now requiring explicit flag to elicit the DELEG referral response. But I just wanted to mention, I have one now. Should it be listed in the document? I don't know. If there is an implementation section, I'm okay either way.
All right, thanks, Schumann.
Paul Hoffman, I don't think that it should be listed in the draft. I think there should be a separate page for the working group. What we found in the past is that when you list implementations in the draft and there's a long lag between two versions of the draft, new implementations have come in, they want a new draft so they can see, people don't know them, such like that. So if you chairs set up a page in the GitHub and say, here are some here are some implementations, and you follow, the pull requests and such like that. And that page is pointed to in the draft, maybe up at the front near the abstract. There's two reasons for wanting to list implementations. One is to show people, yes, it's not just one party. That's not that important at this point because we already know that it's multiple. The other one is so that the implementers can test against each other. That should be much more up to date. So I would propose do that, put something in the beginning, and then that gets ripped out at the time of moving to IETF last call.
Okay. That's useful. And the reason why I'm going to push on getting that implementation list published is because part of what we have to do in order to publish this spec as a proposed standard is be able to document the deployment and operational considerations. So I will put my work group chair nerd hat on and say, if you read the charter down in the deliverables, there's a list of things that we have to do. And I think in order for us to have a concrete list of deployment and operational considerations, we may need to treat this specification in a similar vein to the way that the routing area treats implementations of routing protocols. And that is, they won't publish a proposed standard unless there are at least 2 interoperable implementations. I would argue that DNS is one of those protocols that if we screw something up, we're going to cause a lot of problems. So my question for the working group is, how much emphasis do we want to put on some of this interoperability testing so that we know the spec is complete and we have good understanding of what's going on? Jim.
Thanks, Brian. Jim Reed speaking for myself. I think the comments that Paul made a moment or two ago it seems like the most sensible approach to take. So stick something on GitHub. Much as I detest GitHub, I think that's the best bet because then the implementers can update that themselves as and when they update the status of their implementations. I think it's a bad idea to put this into an internet draft at this stage because what do we mean by implementation? And of course, because the spec's still somewhat fluid, the degree of which conformance with that spec will vary with the implementations while stuff is under development. And if we put this in the document, it might give misleading impressions about the viability of all these other implementations. So I think stick it in GitHub for now and just see how it goes.
Good. Thanks, Jim.
Petr Špaček, I'm very happy to hear that implementations, plural, are required. Thank you. And I'm happy to comply.
Okay. So I'd also be interested in people's opinions on us treating this specification in a similar vein to the way that routing area does with routing protocols, that we wouldn't put this forth for publication of proposed standard until we've actually been able to demonstrate that interoperability. Any thoughts on that? The esteemed Mr. Hoffman.
Again, Paul Hoffman. This isn't routing. This is a client-server protocol. And the client side, the resolver side, gets to do whatever the hell it wants when it gets a DELEG record or a DELEG RR set. It is perfectly reasonable for it to say, for example, with a DELEG RR set, oh, look, here is a server name and here's an indirect. I don't like indirects. They slow me down, and throw it away, not chase it down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want us to say, oh, we don't have 2 resolvers that do it the way that they could do it, or that they make their S list the optional way that is defined. So before we say 2 implementations of each, we should be fairly careful. I think saying an implementation on the authoritative side is easy to do. So we should have 2 authoritative servers that, given the same zone file, although of course, we're going to be having to pass around either keys or zone files that are unsigned that obviously should be signed, that do the same thing, that's fine. I don't want us to get borked on, did this resolver, which is doing it not the way I would want to, but is perfectly valid, because resolvers get to do whatever they want to protect themselves.
Yeah, and I wanted to be very clear that I wanted to ask the question that if we were to do that, how would we want to do that? So I don't want to just blanket take the rules that routing uses, because you're exactly right, Paul. They are slightly different in the way they do things. Peter.
But check again. I think that Paul raises a good point that having an implementation doesn't mean that they behave exactly the same way. Right now, we have at least 4 open source implementation of resolvers. They definitely don't behave the same. That's okay. I think that the criteria is more like if we define delegations in any possible way, can the client get there? But it doesn't mean that the path taken to get to that final chart zone is the same. But who cares? The important bit is that it will resolve. Right. Within some like sane boundaries, like, okay, if you have 25 levels of indirection, then perhaps that doesn't have to resolve, but you get the idea.
And to circle this back around to the conversation that we had during your presentation, is that we could define those characteristics based on the test vectors and understanding what we expect them to do or not to do. And that may be functional, but it sounds like there's at least interest in discussing how we want to make sure that implementations are doing the right things from the protocol perspective, not necessarily the decisions they get to make on their own.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
All right. Any other comments or questions on the implementations and testing? Okay, and then so the last thing is as I mentioned earlier, we did a revision, or we refreshed the requirements document. It's been in a holding pattern since almost the beginning of the working group, and I have not seen anybody say that we're missing a requirement or there's a requirement that that isn't reasonable to be in there. Going back to the charter, we do have a deliverable saying we're supposed to publish the requirements as an informational document. I can't speak for all area directors, but in my experience with some of these documents, it gets a little tedious to read something that says requirement 1, requirement 2, requirement 3, requirement 4. So we were purposely holding off on publishing this until we felt comfortable with it. So the question for the working group is are people comfortable with the state of the requirements document? Should we go ahead and push them forward for publication as an informational RFC? Yeah, the other option is to let it expire and then we'll shove them in as like an appendix to the protocol specification when we publish that. But who knows? Paul.
Paul Hoffman. So we have a couple of options here, and boy, oh good, Eric is going to the mic. Oh, no, you can pull out the knife now, because the first one I was going to suggest is we just ignore the charter and let it expire. Oh, good. For those of you who didn't see it, he shrugged. This is good. He didn't pull out the knife. I believe that is actually the right thing. I believe probably, other than Tim Wyszynski and you two, no one here has read the requirements in the last 6 months. We're not trying to hew towards them or anything like that. So ignoring it seems reasonable. The other thing, if we really want to follow what we promised we were going to do and things like that, the sort of passive aggressive adolescent way to do it is to actually send it in to the IESG after we have sent the protocol in. That is, make sure that the protocol matches the requirements. It goes in, the IETF accepts it, then we say, by the way, we were supposed to do this. That sort of, oh, I guess I can. I think that that's reasonable to do actually in this case, because it was good for us to work on the requirements initially, and then it hasn't been important at all.
Yep. Eric.
So Eric Ving, responsibility for DELEG. So if this working group does not deliver a deliverable that's on the charter, what a surprise. You won't be the first one to do this, right? So you can completely ignore the charter on this one. You cannot do stuff outside of the charter, but you are not forced to do everything. Now, pretty much like Paul said, if the working group wants to publish the requirement, fair enough. I have no opinion there. Please
do it at the same time as you submit the basis protocol, right?
Yep.
They need to go together, else it will slow down everything.
Yep.
And I will basically block. If you want to push the requirement first, I will block it at the IAG until the base protocol comes, because that's way easier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm going to let another former AD say something before I do. Go ahead, Warren.
So Warren Kamari, Google. I mean, I don't see a downside to publishing it. And I think it's often really useful for people who sort of end up looking at a new protocol to be like, why did they do this? So I'm pretty much always in favor of having use cases, requirements, sort of deployment advice, etc. I mean, we could try ship it now and then just have it held until the other stuff happens. But it's useful for historical purposes. In like 15 years, people are like, why did they do this crazy?
Yeah, and we'll see how many people actually remember me saying this early on in the process. One of the easy ways to do this is to actually take the requirements, make them an appendix to the protocol specifications so that they're all together, much in the same way that Eric was talking about. My only concern with that is then the people who actually spent the time writing the requirements document, managing it, generally don't end up getting credit for writing that document. So that that there's some trade-offs there. But what I'm going to propose is that we'll go ahead and sit on it, not do anything until we get to the point where the protocol specification is ready to publish, and then we can make a decision on how we want to handle it. In that vein, what I'm going to say is that we probably don't need to refresh it either. If it expires, it expires. It's not like we can't go back and publish the next version. So that should be an easy way to maintain it. Warren
Kamari, Google again. I mean, the one concern, and I've seen this happen not infrequently, is a group will work on requirements and then work on actually implementing it, and then realize their implementation doesn't quite match their requirements, and then go back and change the requirements. So I think we sort of need to commit that if these were the requirements when we started building this, we can't retroactively change them to make it look better.
Yep. And that's part of what we should be doing with the protocol specification is seeing which requirements it actually satisfies. And I know that there is some work to do that, but we need to, we need to flesh that out as well. So. All right. Any other comments on the requirements document? Okay, that brings us to the last bullet. Does anybody else they would like to discuss in this working group related to DELEG? I have one more topic, but I'll let Ted go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. One of the things that we can do with this specification is ask for an early review of the DNS directorate. That seems a little funny because I know that a lot of the DNS directorate members are sitting in this room, but Dwayne and I were actually talking about this as maybe it's a way to get potentially some somewhat uninvolved folks to look at it to make sure that we're not missing something obvious. So, and I see that co-chair of the DNS directorate popping up, so I'm going to defer to Jim.
Thanks, Brian. This time I'm wearing my co-chair hat for the DNS directorate. If this working group does decide to throw this over the wall for an early review, I promise that we will assign somebody who's not been active in this working group to do that initial check of the document.
That would be awesome.
Assuming there is somebody in the directorate that fits that criteria.
Thanks. And then I think what I would then ask is of Peter and Ralph and the other authors, next revision or?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that we do that after we add the stuff about the unknown keys. Basically, what we discussed today, we implement what the working group told us to do. And then I think we will be out of to-dos, basically. That would be a good time to have proper preview.
Okay. So if you are asking, if you are asking for directorate review, may I suggest ops directorate as well?
Okay. Ted.
Ted Hardy, this is a different topic. You okay with going on to?
I believe so.
There have been some discussions on the list of potential extensions which would be relevant for DELEG. And since we were just talking about the charter when I put my name in, I was wondering if the chairs had any advice on whether or not it would be possible to, and when it might be possible to consider rechartering to consider some of those extensions.
So there are two other items in our charter right now that we don't have documents for, and they're basically waiting for the base protocol spec to be at a mature enough level that we can start working on them. But I would think that if we're doing directorate reviews, we're getting close to feeling like the document is fairly solid, we should be able to consider some of that rechartering, even if it essentially takes some of the deliverables that we have done, but they keep the deliverables that we still need to work on, like transport and signaling, I think it was. I don't remember what the other deliverable was, but so I think there's a reasonable discussion to have with the ADs about rechartering in the next, maybe 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Allison's up first.
Allison.
Yeah, hi. I was happy to see Heather talk about the registries, having talked about this a bit. And I see there's an example of root having DELEG in the document. What are the plans and the timeline for kind of nailing down some of the details about how registries, as opposed to operators of authoritatives, work with this? Is that something that will turn up in the rechartering?
So the only registry would be for the RR types, right? And that's the.
Are you talking about IANA registries, or are you talking about?
I am talking somewhat about IANA registry, but I think that registry operators will have, as mentioned, there's things for them to think about, and I'm not sure it's just leave it completely undocumented. Let it kind of be decided. We've got a lot of undocumented stuff in how we operate the RRR system, and I wondered if this group was hoping to maybe put a little bit more documentation around that.
So Allison, my brain locked on the wrong definition of registry.
Oh.
Dwayne just reminded me that there is a document in regex related to this. So I think things are going to be moving forward soon.
And it's and there's coordination of some sort.
Yes.
Okay, I have missed that. Thank you.
Okay.
Paul Hoffman. So
yeah, Paul.
We do have two more things in the charter, which is transports and indirection, whatever, which is already in the document. So that was before, when we thought that it might be different and such like that. So we really only have one thing, which is transport. We know, people have been talking outside, know of at least two other extensions that we're interested in. Excuse me. So I would like the idea of rechartering for more extensions to be considered sooner rather than later, and maybe that could happen as we send the base document on, because we're still going to be working on transport and such like that. But I don't want, you said 6 months. I think that that's actually not a good idea. I think sooner would be better, so that we know what are the first gang of extensions. If you say we're going to recharter, which extensions do we want to see in the rechartering? Then we'll have a much better idea. One of them is trivial, but possibly controversial, that's not in now. And I would like to see if there are others like that.
Yeah, I believe I said within 6 months. I'll have to check the transcript to see if I actually said it or I just thought it. But yes, we can have that to conversations. Ralph.
Yeah, to Allison, the work for the RIR stuff cannot happen in this working group. It has to happen in other working group like RPP or so. And we as the authors have reached out to people from that working group, and we are more than happy to also participate as good as we can. Unfortunately, this time there was a conflict, so I couldn't attend the RPP one. So to help the registry to deliver DELEG in their system. So I think there is coordination, and we're trying our best to help out. And there's anything that any one of these communities is missing or think we should do more, please reach out to us.
Great. That drains the queue. I'm out of topics. Yeah. So one other thing that we want to consider at some point is, and we'll bring this up on the mailing list, is whether or not we want to try and do an interim between now and the spring meeting. This is one of the longer periods of time between meetings, and if people are interested in doing an interim like late January, early February, to try and make sure we're doing momentum, keeping that going, we will. Peter.
I'm thinking that perhaps the feedback from DNS their early review might be good to have if we have interim, because perhaps there will be something, fundamentally we've missed, and then that will be worth having a meeting. But depending on what comes out of the review, I don't know.
Yep, that actually makes a lot of sense. So Dwayne and I will take the action to make sure we get those directorate reviews, both the DNS directorate and the ops directorate, and that will be gated by the next revision of the draft. And then we can have a conversation on the mailing list about doing an interim. Jeff
Houston, co-chair of the DNS Directorate. We, in standard operating procedure, assign a single individual to do a review. And you seem to be putting a lot of weight on the outcome of that single individual, which is fine, but it does seem like you're over-interpreting one individual's review. If you really want a broader review with more folk in the directorate to actually look over it and give you individual views, because we have no way of caucusing multiple views, but we can farm it out to a few people if that's what you feel is appropriate. Because I just heard a comment that said, we will meet after a review, and it's kind of, that's just one.
Right.
So if you want more, it would be good if you could informally indicate to Jim and myself that that's what you were after, and we could probably engineer something for you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. No, when Jeff and I know directorates a lot. So yes, each director will give us one reviewer, but Eric had a good suggestion from the ops directorate, and there's a few other folks that we'll probably try and ping as well, just to get to. Basically, Jeff, what I'm trying to do is make sure we get the external views so that people aren't just in a little bit of a vacuum here in the working group.
I'm not quite sure you got what I said. I said we can ping more than one directorate individual.
Oh, yeah.
Do reviews if that's what you want.
Okay.
But the initiative is back on your plate as a working group chair to at least flag to us informally that's what you want.
Got it. Yeah. It's Friday. I did miss that. Thanks. All right. Last call. Going once, going twice. All right. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. DNS Op is next. So if people are going to be there, you can probably just stay in your chairs. All right. Thanks, everybody.